Welcome to Film Witch, a podcast with me, Sandy Settle, practicing pagan witch and tarot reader for over a decade, and a big fan of films. Here I talk about movies, their intersections with witchcraft and femininity, and whatever else I have on my mind, which is usually a lot. Blessed be, come in and sit for a spell. And please rate and review me on Apple, follow me on YouTube and Spotify, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. It helps way more than you might realize, and it means everything to me. Please consider joining my Patreon, which is the best thing you can do to help this podcast continue. You can also find me on Instagram and on Letterboxd at FilmWitchPod. You can send kind words, suggestions, and business inquiries to filmwitchpod@gmail.com. From 2006, Iris just can't get over her ex Jasper in London. Amanda is breaking up with her cheating boyfriend in LA. They both decide on a whim to house swap for the holidays, and suddenly begin to find themselves in new loves in ways they could previously only dream of. Nancy Meyers' best film is corny, heartfelt, and warm as a Christmas fireplace. Hello, everyone, and happy holidays. I am so glad that you're here again once more to listen to me gab about a film. In our house, we kind of celebrate 3 different winter holidays. I'm a practicing pagan witch, obviously. You know that if you're here. And I celebrate, of course, Yule, the winter solstice, around the 21st to the 22nd to the 23rd sometimes. And we celebrate Christmas in our household mostly because my husband and I both grew up celebrating Christmas as kids. And I was unfortunately raised Mormon. So yeah. It's certainly not Mormon anymore, but enjoy the secular aspects of Christmas, such as Santa and Tannenbaums and all of that good fun stuff. Some presents, some hot chocolate, some snow, some snowmen, some reindeer, you know. And my husband is of Jewish heritage. He is not a practicing Jew, but he comes from a Jewish ancestry, and his mother was raised Jewish in Brooklyn. So we also have a menorah in our house, and we try to light the candles every night of Hanukkah. We generally make it through the first few nights and then kind of tend to slip off towards the end. I wanted to get my child some gelt this year, but unfortunately I realized a lot of the vegan gelt that I could find is made in Israel. So yeah, we're not doing that. So no gelt this year probably. But yes, we do celebrate Hanukkah a little bit. So that's our house for the holidays. Would be super interested to hear any listeners, what aspects of this time of year do you celebrate? In what ways do you celebrate? I know everybody is a little bit different, and this episode will probably be coming out around Thanksgiving, probably a little bit after Thanksgiving. So, there's also that aspect of if you're from the U.S., there's like just like mixed feelings about Thanksgiving as a holiday. I think for a lot of us who are in the younger generations, I'm an elder millennial myself. Grew up celebrating Thanksgiving, had really magical Thanksgivings at my grandma's house growing up. So I definitely have fond memories of that holiday, but also obviously have mixed feelings about celebrating a day where basically celebrating genocide. Yeah. That's a vibe I think we should all be steering ourselves away from, you guys. Anyway, I do enjoy food, but I'm also a vegan, so, I'm not really into turkey. However, this year, we have a full house for Thanksgiving, and that is very unusual for us. Both of our mothers and my brother-in-law will be here for Thanksgiving, so it will be fun, I think. But it'll be the first kind of like big holiday celebration that we've had in our home since we bought our house last year. So yeah, it'll be nice, and I am excited for my mom to get to meet my mother-in-law, and it'll be the first time they're meeting, and in person anyway, and for both of my child's grandmothers to get to be around her at the same time. So yeah, I hope everyone who's listening has a good holiday season, however you choose to spend it, or however you choose to celebrate it or not celebrate it. This year has been probably the hardest year, maybe of our lifetimes in a general sense. And honestly, we've been through a lot the past couple decades in the US and in the world. So that's really saying something. But yeah, here's to this wretched year being over and a chance for a new beginning. As a pagan, I've already kind of switched over to the New Year mindset. A lot of us witches do that around Samhain, Halloween at the end of October. That's our new year. So as far as I'm concerned, we're already in the new year. And I think that is reflecting in some of the energies, especially around certain very negative, very malignant structures kind of beginning to crumble and implode. Thank goddess for that. And I believe this is just the beginning of that, and we'll see a lot more of that in the next few months. So my hope for everyone in the New Year's to hang in there and listen to me talk about this Nancy Meyers magical fantasy. That's right. Today I am talking about Nancy Meyers' The Holiday. This is my favorite Nancy Meyers movie. I definitely, I wouldn't say I guess I'm a fan of hers. Not like a big fan. But I think that what she does in her films, she does it better than anybody. So I'm a fan of her in that way. She has a very particular kind of white person, rich mom aesthetic in her films that I think one can appreciate in a general sense, right? Once, of course, we get kind of like a little bit deeper into like, the kind of ideology or ethos behind maybe her aesthetic, it gets a little bit more complicated. But on a surface level, I think it's easy to appreciate Nancy Meyers' style in her films. It's like a very appealing maximalist rich people houses. You see it in like Something's Gotta Give, with like Diane Keaton's house. It's like this like beautiful like beachside house, and like The Parent Trap, like there's this beautiful kind of like vineyard villa house, and there's just like this particular kind of like amiable liberal white person aesthetic. I think that of all her films, this one is the most successful in a kind of like well-rounded, complete sense. Most of her other films I feel I can appreciate on a surface level, but once we get down into kind of like the more complicated politics of the worldview that she is presenting to us, I think it lacks nuance, obviously. So you put a Nancy Meyers movie on, in my opinion, when you're feeling like you just don't want to think too much about what's going on. And I would say that The Holiday is her most successful film in that you're able to kind of harness this feeling of like not needing to think too hard about what's going on, but also not feeling guilty when you're watching it in quite the same way some of her other films make me feel guilty as a white passing person. I think if you're trying to be more, if you're trying to be more socially conscious, right, and you consider yourself to be a progressive, like I do, for instance, you want to make sure that you're being cognizant of the ways certain lives are being presented to you in art, right? And whether or not they have a bias. I think that it's certainly true that Nancy has a bias, right? She doesn't have any people of color in her films, generally speaking. And she's not really exploring any difficult themes in her films. They tend to be kind of, heteronormative love kind of relationships. But like I said, I think of all of her films, as far as that preoccupation in her work goes, The Holiday does it best. And I think The Holiday is, to date, her best film for a lot of different reasons. I've watched it definitely the most of any of her films, and it's the one that I enjoy the most. I would also say that this is probably my favorite rom-com, excluding only When Harry Met Sally. I think in an old review that I posted on Letterboxd, probably like 2017 or something of this film, I said this was my favorite rom-com. That's not true. My favorite rom-com is definitely When Harry Met Sally. But this is definitely my number 2. And if you've been following me for a while on Letterboxd, you might have noticed a year or two ago, I went through Vanity Fair's full list of 50 best romantic comedies. And I watched every single film on that list, or rewatched in a lot of cases, because I think about half of them I had seen already. And I link that list in a lot of those reviews, so it's easy to find if you ever want to try to do that challenge yourself. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and there's definitely some not great films on that list, but most of my favorites are on that list as well. But this one, interestingly, is not on that list, and I thought that was a big omission. Maybe they left it off because it's a Christmas movie. I think a lot of people will watch this movie around Christmas. It's set during Christmas time, but it didn't say that they were excluding holiday films. So I think that this one should have definitely been in the top 50, because pretty much everything it does extremely well. And as far as having all the hallmarks of this genre, it checks all those boxes. So it's a glaring omission that this particular film is not on that list. But anyway, I digress. First of all, I think I want to talk a little bit. This is the first thing I kind of had in my notes, because it was the first thing that came to mind when I wanted to kind of discuss why I like this film as much as I do. I think the cast is like perfect. Like everybody in the cast is perfect. So we have a central kind of quadrangle. We have Cameron Diaz, Kate Winslet, Jude Law, and Jack Black as the romantic leads in this film. But one of the wonderful things about it is that Nancy is really, really good at focusing on the two women over the men, right? She's really good at a certain kind of feminine perspective in her films, and I think this does it the best of them all, where she's not just trying to get her female characters matched up with men, but she gives them time to explore themselves, right? A lot of rom-coms make the mistake, I think, of moving too quickly into an idea of romance with another character. Whereas one of the things that Nancy is really good at, and her scripts are great at, is giving her women a little breathing room to discover themselves or discover previously unexplored parts of themselves. And I think it's one of the things I like the most about her writing. But all the side characters in this film are great as well. Rufus Sewell is great at playing evil guys. He's an evil hottie in that way. If you've ever seen A Knight's Tale, he's fantastic in that, but he's really, really good in this film as Iris's ex, Jasper, who is just awful, and who I think many of us, people who date men, have met a Jasper, had to wrangle with a Jasper at some point in our lives. So definitely relatable. Shit male behavior that we have witnessed in many cases ourselves in real time. Eli Wallach, who plays Arthur, is just a perfect casting, and I just think he's so great in that role, so lovable. Even like the really small roles, like Amanda's assistants, who are only in one scene, are John Krasinski and Catherine Hahn, which I always think is so funny when I rewatch this. They're only in that one scene. There's these two like adorable little girls play Graham's daughters, Jude Law's daughters in this, and they're just perfect. Everything is kind of impeccably assembled in this film. I think all of Nancy's films are trying to achieve this kind of level of like fantasy perfection. This one really, I think, sells it with the most conviction and is the most convincing ultimately. I kind of always make this joke that I'm always kind of buying whatever Nancy is selling, even if it's preposterous. Like we watched The Parent Trap, I think, over the summer. And both my husband and I had seen that film before. I grew up watching it a lot, but it was the first time I had watched it in maybe like over a decade or more. And I was like, this movie is ridiculous. Like nothing in this movie makes sense. But I was like, nevertheless, I am buying what Nancy is selling, but I really, really, I feel like for the holiday, I'm really buying what Nancy is selling. Like this it's like she's trying to sell it to me personally, and I'm like, you're doing a great job. So for this episode, I watched the film again with Nancy Meyers' commentary track, which is actually something that I had done before for this film. It's actually one of my favorite commentary tracks for a film, and I highly recommend it if you've never watched this film with her commentary. I think it's very enjoyable, and she gives a lot of wonderful insights into, why they assembled sets in certain ways, or why she chose to cast certain people. I'll get into it a little bit, as far as like my own reflections on what she was saying in a lot of cases. But that was the major bulk of my research for this episode, was listening to this commentary track with her, because honestly, she's very thorough and really brings up, I think, almost everything that's kind of worth knowing about the making of this film as she goes along. And she has like kind of a few people kind of guesting, but they only guest for like a few minutes at a time. Like Hans Zimmer's in it, who did the soundtrack with her, but he only kind of pops in every now and then. So it's kind of an interesting, it's interesting in that way. And I guess that's probably my least favorite thing about the commentary track, is that like you're not always entirely sure who's like kind of interjecting every now and then. But I would say 9 times out of 10, it's Nancy who's talking about the film and sharing her insights on the film. So definitely worth, you can kind of disregard like other people interjecting, because it happens pretty seldom. Speaking of Hans Zimmer, though, I think his soundtrack for this movie is pretty much perfect. Like he understood this assignment to a T, and it's really quite beautiful in its way, and it has a lot of kind of classic elements to it. There's a moment where Jack Black's character Miles is playing an Ennio Morricone song, and I always felt like that was kind of a nod to what Hans is trying to harness in this particular soundtrack, is that kind of classic feel. For like Nancy also brings up like Billy Wilder films a few times, and and Some Like It Hot, and I think The Apartment is mentioned. I think I'm going to bring that up a little bit later, but harnessing that kind of soundtrack, like a very sort of classic feeling soundtrack, and everyone having their own theme and things like that. I really like those kinds of soundtracks. I know they're maybe not for everyone, and they're not new, right? But I think that was the point, that Hans was trying to do something that was a throwback, and it's quite beautiful. Back to a sentiment I was sharing a moment ago, where this is just kind of the height of what Nancy does in The Holiday. I would say if you've never seen any of Nancy's movies, or even if you're maybe not so much a rom-com person, I think The Holiday in particular is worth watching. And it's maybe like the only Nancy Meyers movie you need to see in your life, if this is not, generally speaking, your bag. I know there's like some famous movie houses that circulate online every now and then. I know the house in Practical Magic is definitely one of them. I would say that maybe too often Iris's cottage, called Rose Cottage, in this film gets left off that list, and I think it's probably definitely, for me anyway, an iconic house in cinema. And it shows up pretty early on, and it's a great kind of it's just a great visual for the way that Nancy constructs her scenes, and the way she thinks about interior spaces and exterior spaces, and kind of telling us things about characters from their living space, particularly. I'm definitely a bit of a homebody. I have a moon in Pisces in my chart, so I really like to go home at the end of the day. And I like to have long stretches at home to recharge my batteries, as it were. I'm a fire sign. I'm a Sagittarius with the Leo rising, but I kind of need both of those things in my life. I need some time out with a friend, and then I need some time to myself. So I really like the emphasis in Nancy's films on decorating a home a certain way to tell us things about the person who's living in it. I feel like I also do that in my own personal life. I'm very into decorating our home, and I've always been that way, and I like to decorate it the most. So it's like every available space gets something interesting to look at. In any case, as far as Rose Cottage goes, they constructed the exterior in Surrey, England, which at one point Iris does say that she is from Surrey. And it's just I believe just the facade of the house. So all the interiors, this is like Amanda's house in LA and Iris's house in England, and Graham's house and all of these places. These are sets on sound stages in LA. The film was mostly shot in LA. And then there are some scenes that were shot in the UK. In the commentary, Nancy mentions that the little like market that Amanda stops in after she gets to England was actually a candle shop. I believe it was like a gift shop. And then they turned it into a market because she said all the markets around there looked like 7-Elevens. So they were not romantic enough for her. So that gives you a little idea of like one of the scenes being shot in England, but Nancy putting her personal touch on it. There's some really great sort of instant dated aspects of this film when you watch it. You know that it came out in the early 2000s for several reasons. One is when Amanda's at her computer and she first starts looking up house swapping, there's like a very old school original Google search bar, which I noticed right away, like where it would, millennials will probably remember, I don't know about the Gen Zers, sorry, but there's like a little thing at the bottom. It said feeling lucky. That was just like something that was only on that old school Google, and it was like on an all white page with just the Google logo and the search bar, like no ads. Like I was just so bowled over by that for a moment because I was like, wow, like a little corner of the internet with no ads, like how magical that was. Like there's ads are so ubiquitous these days that I think that we have started to not notice them anymore because they're so prevalent. But people forget that back, in the earlier kind of incarnations of the internet, a lot of the internet did not initially have ads on it that way. You would find ads more so like on a specific website, but like for instance, like the Google search engine, it used to just be a lot less cluttered. So that's something I noticed right away. Another thing I always notice about this film, because it is a throwback for me and reminds me of my own, is Iris's BlackBerry. And I had a BlackBerry through a certain period of the mid 2010s, like late 2000s, early 2010s. I had a BlackBerry for like 4 or 5 years. And that was, to this day, that was like my favorite phone. Oh my gosh. Now Blackberries are totally defunct. Some Gen Zers might not even know what a BlackBerry is, but it's like it's a relatively early smartphone. And it had like a physical keyboard and a little like side scroller. It was my favorite phone. I just remember I loved it so much, and I was sad the day that I had to trade it in for an iPhone. So yeah, the BlackBerry puts you in a very specific time and place immediately in this film. Shout out to my BlackBerry. I've always kept all of my old phones, but my BlackBerry is missing. So I don't even have like, the BlackBerry itself to just like look at the dead screen of. I just have like fond memories of it. It's the only phone that to this day I can't find it. Like I have my first phone still, my Motorola pink Razr phone. But my BlackBerry is just like, I don't know. It went wherever the socks from the dryer go. So one of the first things that Nancy brings up in her commentary track is that there's this plot point that she wrote into the script where Amanda can't cry. And I always thought this was like a funny plot point where it's like, is that true? Like, are there people who can't cry? I think like a person like me can't even conceive of that because I cry so often. I'm like, it might be actually nice to like not cry sometimes because I am always crying. But this is based on Nancy's own personal experience of not being able to cry for a certain period of her life. There's quite a bit of autobiographical stuff in her films. I don't know if I, always realized to what extent that was true. But for instance, like in Something's Gotta Give, I know Nancy, like I know a lot of that film is very autobiographical for her. And like, it's funny because when you watch that now, you're like, this movie's preposterous. Like nobody would choose like old, like wrinkly, grouchy, mean old Jack Nicholson over beautiful, kind, sweet, brings you breakfast in bed and Eats Your Pussy Keanu Reeves. Like, no one would. But I realized in retrospect that the reason that Nancy wrote that movie that way is because she is writing a kind of subverted or externalized autobiography in that film. So it's not about like what is logical. It's about something that happened to her, right? And there are aspects of that as well in The Holiday. I know that kind of this dynamic, I think, that Iris has with her ex Jasper, that's really quite toxic, is to one extent or another based on something that Nancy went through herself. And there are several times in the commentary where she kind of alludes to that. She never goes into detail about it, but I did not find that hard to believe because I also have been around men like Jasper, and I felt like that was a very realistic character. Probably one of her best kind of like takedowns of a certain kind of man. I really like that character. I think it's really well done, well acted, and well written. But yeah, this plot point about Amanda not being able to cry, that was something that happened to Nancy for a while, where she was unable to cry and wanted to give it to a character at some point. Yeah, cannot recommend the commentary track for this film highly enough. I think if you've seen it, you know, it brings a whole new dimension if you listen to the commentary while you watch it a second time around or a 15th time around like me. Okay, so I think the house swapping thing in this movie is strange. I was thinking about it and I was like, do people still do that? Like, I guess I feel like this is more like a product of its time. Like, this is like pre-Airbnb kind of where people were still even exploring the idea of like staying in someone else's house versus staying in a hotel. Like growing up, like I remember that staying in a hotel or a motel was really your only option when you were traveling. You did not have the option to rent someone else's house for a few days the way you do now. And now when my husband and I travel, we always book an Airbnb. We never get a hotel because if you're our age, you know that that's always going to be a better deal money-wise. And it's probably going to be cleaner, and they're probably going to have better toiletries and all of these different things and more privacy. But at this point, yeah, I think I was like, is this like, when this movie came out, I was just graduating high school and I didn't see it until later, you know, like probably when I was not going to college anymore by the time I saw this movie. So I don't really know if I remember, you know, like when Airbnb started being a thing or when I personally started using it. But to me, this seems like something that was like the proto Airbnb is to swap your house with somebody. In any case, it feels very quaint now to kind of like be like, oh yeah, like let's swap houses. Like you would probably nobody would do that. And like an Airbnb generally is like these days, you know, I don't know about in the beginning, but it's set up more like a hotel room these days, you know, like you're basically like renting like a room in a separate part of a person's house 9 times out of 10. Like you're not like renting their whole house with all their belongings in it. But yeah, I don't know. It seems very quaint to me. So that's like maybe one of the aspects of this that just like doesn't feel totally real anymore. And maybe it did for us like a brief couple years there. But now when you watch that, you're like, that seems fake. That's how I feel when I watch it anyway. I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but I'm not sure I buy that two total strangers would swap houses like that. Nancy talks a lot about the house layouts in this film. Like you'll see when you listen, she's so obsessed with that aspect. She's almost like, she always like hires like a different production, like an actual production designer, probably because she has to, right? But I feel like there's this part of her that like wants to be the production designer for her own films. And I wonder like how much she drives them insane, like wanting things like a certain way. In any case, she's like Martha Stewart in this commentary because she mentions so much stuff about the production design and why she chose certain things and why she wanted things arranged a certain way and all of this stuff, you know. It's really quite fun to listen to because you really see like how important that is to her. And I think you can tell, right, when you watch her films, you can tell how important that is to her. But in the commentary for The Holiday, it was just confirmation for me that had always been right, you know, that she's like personally really obsessed with the production design and the scenes and the way things are laid out in the rooms and the houses in her films. There's in Amanda's house, for instance, in LA, there's this really wonderful room in her house that is like her like home theater, where she has like, she doesn't have like a movie theater screen, but she has a big screen TV, right? It's like probably like state of the art for the time, and then like a huge physical media collection of like all, this was like 2006, so it was like all DVDs, right? Like every DVD that had ever come out in 2006. And it's just like, it's such a great room, right? And Nancy talks in the commentary about how it was like everyone on the crew's favorite room, that everybody just like wanted to hang out in there. And I think that's so much fun. Like, I just love that it's like, if you were going through a list of like really great physical media scenes in film, I think this film would have to be on there, because there's just this great, like, Amanda's character is she makes film trailers, right? Her job is to make trailers. So it's like, it makes sense that, she lives in LA and she has this big house and she has this big physical media room, right? And it's like, it's so great to have scenes like that from films from the time that this came out, because it's just like, if you're a physical media person and a physical media collector, like I am, for instance, we have like, 1,200 films in our collection at home. I think films like, like scenes like this in a film, they may just kind of be like part of kind of a larger conversation that the film is having about certain characters, but I think they're very valuable, not only like physical media itself, but like the documentation of physical media. I don't know. It's just like, it's a scene that maybe some people would watch and they wouldn't think much of it. But to me, it's always like kind of profound. And it's definitely one of the best. It's one of the best scene layouts in the film. It's one of the best rooms as far as the production design goes. And I loved hearing Nancy say that it was everybody's favorite, because I feel that way when I watch it. I'm always like, wow, like how awesome and how excited Iris is when she goes into that room, and how excited I think a lot of us in the audience feel. If you're a physical media person, you're just like, I would never leave this room, like that. Oh, another fun thing is in the movie trailer in the beginning, the fake one that they make that has like Lindsay Lohan and James Franco, I think, in it, which is, oh my God, so of its time. But the voice in the movie trailer is a man named Hal Douglas, and he is a veteran movie trailer voiceover guy. And I think one of my favorite aspects of the holiday is making him Amanda's conscience, essentially. So she has this kind of inner monologue that sounds like a guy doing the voiceover in a movie trailer, because she makes movie trailers for a living. And I just think that's so much fun. Like, it's absolutely one of my favorite kind of narrative strokes that Nancy came up with for this film. It's just, it's just one of those great little Nancy Meyers things that I think she's so good at, as far as like the psychological structure of romantic comedy, like it's like almost like a screwball thing, like there's a lot of like humor to that, but it's also like, it's just like great, it's a great movie quality, it's a great movie thing. Just a couple little notes I had about Cameron Diaz in this movie. This is definitely my favorite film of hers. I think she's really, really funny in it, and you can see that in several scenes, and I'm glad that in the commentary, Nancy also mentions this. She just says that that Cameron's a very natural comedian, and that a lot of people maybe wouldn't expect that to look at her. That she's kind of very typical kind of like blonde Hollywood bombshell kind of, or about her like model energy, I guess. But she is actually extremely funny, and I think she's very, very funny in this, and she has kind of great physical comedy in this. The scene where she like first gets to England and she's just kind of like puttering around Iris's house, like trying to figure out what to do with herself, because she's a workaholic, so she doesn't know how to chill. Nancy said that she like kind of was like, well, just like wander around Iris's house and act bored, basically. And she shot like 10 minutes of footage, of Cameron just kind of like wandering around the house. But there's this like that wonderful part where she like puts in the Killer's Hot Fuss and starts singing at the top of her lungs to Mr. Brightside. Like, I think we can, all the millennials can relate to that scene. It's a great scene. Maybe the Gen Zers, not so much, but yeah. A formative album for me. Nancy also mentions that there's like an hour of footage that was edited out of this film. So it's already like over 2 hours, which is actually quite long, I would say, for a romantic comedy. And I'm definitely one of those people who complains all the time about movies being too long. I'm definitely that annoying fuck. So you're welcome. But yeah, I would watch a longer version of this film. That's just how I feel about that. I can be a hypocrite too, like as much as the next person. Some of my favorite quotes in the commentary are about Jack Black. And Nancy went a little bit into why she chose him, why she cast him in this film. He's definitely a bit of an unexpected pick, I would say. Definitely probably one of my favorite romantic leads in anything, just because he's such a kind of unorthodox choice for a romantic lead, but does so well at it in this particular film. She saw him in School of Rock, which I think that's probably a lot of people's first Jack Black movie to this day. And she said that made her want to cast him in this film, which I thought was so interesting. But she said, quote, I sensed he would be really wonderful with a woman on screen because I saw a certain kind of tenderness he had with the kids. And I thought that would work equally as well in the romantic comedy genre. And I just love that quote. I think that's so... She just like really zeroed in on some kind of fundamental thing that I think a lot of people, myself included, enjoy about Jack Black. I know there's plenty of people who like can't stand him and think he's like the most annoying person on earth. But yeah, I don't feel that way about him. I really enjoy him and I love School of Rock. And I think he's very funny, but also has like a real streak of sincerity to him. And maybe that makes him a better comedian, you know? And I like that she was able to just like kind of hone in on this aspect of him of that sincerity, right? That he would, in her own words, be good in a scene with a woman, right? That he would have a tenderness to him. And I think he's like, I just really love him in this. He seems like somebody that you would genuinely want to hang out with, somebody who's genuinely kind and genuinely would be a good friend, right? And I think that was really fundamental to what Nancy was doing with Iris's character, that she really needed to learn how to be friends with a man for a little while first, before it became anything romantic or sexual. That's just like kind of a very important part, in my opinion, of Iris's character arc. And something that was refreshing because we don't get to see that, honestly, that much in romantic films. And it never feels patronizing, right? I recently watched that new Celine Song movie, Materialists, and if you follow me on Letterboxd, you will know I did not care for that film. I think it's trash. And I liked Past Lives. I think it's fine, you know. But yeah, this new one did not hit for me at all. And I think it's part of the reason that I didn't like it is because it's extremely patronizing. Like I felt patronized as the audience, right? Like I felt like I was being talked down to the entire time. And I don't appreciate that. I don't like films that are deriding their audience and mocking their audience. I think they're very disrespectful to people who like films and watch films and spend a lot of time on films. So yeah, I didn't like that one. I felt like I actually thought of this film quite a bit while I was watching Materialists because I think a lot of people... Maybe if you are not a fan of this genre of filmmaking, you would say that you prefer a film like Materialist to something like Nancy Meyers' The Holiday, right? There would be this kind of like cynical person who would be like, no, this is more realistic, you know? But I think like that fundamentally misunderstands what this genre is even for, right? And I wouldn't say that it's just about escapism, right? Or just about a fantasy. I think that that's perhaps narrowing it too much. I think that that's only one aspect of the romantic comedy genre, but I think that if you, for instance, go through that list of 50 films from Vanity Fair of what, you know, they would say are the best romantic comedies, you really get so much nuance among those 50 films. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed about that experience of watching those, you know, every film on that list, because it was just giving me like so many different perspectives as far as like what a romantic comedy film can be, or what even can be perceived as romantic comedy, right? And it changed more than I would have thought. Like the idea, you know, the central like premise of that genre varied quite widely from film to film on that list. And I think, on one hand, you could really look at this film as kind of like this very standard romantic comedy, and I think a lot of people do see it that way. And I think there was a part of me that perceived it that way as well in the beginning. The first few times I watched it, I was like, this is just like a silly romantic comedy, and it's like so corny, But the more I watched it, the more I began to feel like there was like a lot of nuance to the story, and a lot of like real lived experience that Nancy was putting into these characters that I think only became more apparent to me the more I watched it. Like I was saying, like it became clear that like the dynamic between Iris and Jasper was a dynamic that Nancy herself had experienced to some extent, right? And that I also have experienced to some extent, right? Or that, this aspect of like Cameron not being able to cry when she felt sad was something that Nancy herself had also gone through, right? Like, and it's like that thing that we as artists do where we're like constantly kind of culling together little scraps from our lives and like weaving them into this new tapestry of like something completely different, but still like with lived experience and like real emotional resonance and weight and all of that, And I feel like Nancy's doing that so often in this, like the more I've watched it, the more it hits for me, like it feels like it has a lot of emotional realness to it, even if it still is functioning on a fantasy, to some degree, which I'll get into in a minute some more, because I haven't even talked about Jude Law's character Graham yet, who is like kind of like this wonderful ultimate like male like fantasy from like a heterosexual like feminine perspective, like that's kind of like that's like the pinnacle. But yeah, I think in a hetero white patriarchy so kind of bent on violence, films like this inevitably get derided, right, and get belittled. I'm always very, very hesitant in 2025 to be dismissive of anything that women make, right? I think we do that at our peril. I think we dismiss things that women make as silly or frivolous at our own peril. I think that is something that, the heteropatriarchy wants us to do, be dismissive of things that women make. So I would be if I, were to give a bit of unsolicited advice, I would say be very, very skeptical of anyone who's like, rom-coms are for chicks, I would be very skeptical of a person who says something like that. And I think you should be as well. So just saying. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of nuance here. It may not be, well, the film lacks an intersectionality, I would say it not more than makes up for, but somewhat makes up for in its perspective on women's inner lives, right? And women's inner monologues. And I think it has a lot to offer when it comes to those concepts. Maybe like because the trappings are so fantastical in a lot of ways, like they're so warm, everything is so beautifully designed, everything is so kind of warm and clean and perfectly designed, perfectly arrayed, maybe it's easy to miss kind of like the emotional arcs and the nuances the first couple times around. But, pay attention to like, for instance, like how much time the film spends on the friendship between Arthur and Iris, or kind of like those comedic moments like of Cameron's inner monologue being the voice of Hal Douglas, or her emphasis, on being an independent person who's learning to open up to someone else, right? Versus just it being like her looking for a typical romantic partnership, right? It's more about her she has like the more, and Nancy mentions this, like that Cameron's character, Amanda, has kind of the more traditionally masculine role in her dynamic with Graham, and that Graham has the more feminine traits, that he's the one who cries, he's the one who has children, like all these things. And so, pay attention to those things, I think, in context, because things have a lot more nuance than maybe you would first expect. So, everybody, myself included, obsesses over how perfect Jude Law's character is in this movie. Nancy has some really funny things to say about that in the commentary. The scene where he puts the glasses on for the first time. She said that every audience that she's watched the film with, like women are kind of audibly gasping or sighing during that scene. He looks so good, and she shared some really wonderful tidbits about him and the discussions that she had with him and such. But the first scene where he and Cameron kiss in Iris's cottage, she mentioned that Jude was talking about some like it hot and wanted to kind of frame that kiss where they're like trying several times on the kiss with Marilyn Monroe in that film, where it's just like kind of experimentation. I thought that was a wonderful reference. And it showed, like how much of a kind of film lexicon that he had, as far as alluding to other great films in the genre, right? And I really liked that a lot. Another great little instance of Nancy using her own lived experiences in her films is the scene with Mr. Napkin Head, where Graham kind of puts his napkin over his face and then his glasses to make his daughters laugh, and Amanda getting to see that kind of like insular aspect of his relationship with his children. Nancy said that it's something that her ex-husband used to do in restaurants, which I think is so funny. And that she said everyone at the tables around them, he would do it for their children. And everyone at the tables around them would start laughing because it was so funny. Nancy also mentions that she had a friend who was a widower. And so she had some, context for Graham being a widower and saw kind of how difficult that was. I loved, hearing her talk so much about putting her own experiences and her own observations into her film that way. That's something that I do a lot in my own writing. And I always like the kind of like reassurance that I'm not the only person who's like putting so much of myself and my experiences in my work. I know it must be true for all artists, but maybe artists don't always talk about it in a lot of detail. And everybody's process is different. So some people abstract that sort of thing more, but I really enjoyed hearing Nancy talk about stuff like that. Back when I first started, the first few times I watched this film, I was with my ex still and had no children. And I think I view this film very differently now that I am married and have a child. For instance, like the scenes with Graham and his little daughters, I think it's probably still up, in one of my original reviews for this film. I say I'm like, just kind of talking about how great a character Graham is and how perfect he is as a love interest. And I think in this review, I was like, I don't even care that he has kids, like that was a detriment generally, but like in this case, I would let it slide. But now I think that aspect of that character is really wonderful. And I think as a mother myself now, I definitely don't feel the same way. I don't think, I would say most people with children, have totally recontextualized that concept from their own lived experience, and their own relationship with their child and the love that they feel for their child and all of that. You totally perceive like those dynamics in films differently from that point on. It's like you've been fundamentally changed, right? So, I think, I just really love the scenes with him and his daughters in this now. I think they're just really wonderful, and they add a lot of depth and a lot of warmth to the dynamic. And they really they give this whole new dimension to Amanda, where she's like, this is a character who's perpetually kind of single, and perpetually independent, perhaps. And for the first time in her life, maybe now sees that she could like be part of a family that way, in a way that feels real and has a lot of real love in it. And I think it's really quite lovely. One of my favorite scenes of the film is the one where the girls invite her into their tent. I, as a kid, like loved to make tents, and I, my child has several tents, and it's just like her being welcomed into their world in a very literal way. And I just think it's a really wonderful, beautiful scene with so much genuine sweetness to it. And yeah, I think it's one of the best scenes in the film. And yeah, like Graham is like a book editor, you know, like, talk about like the most attractive profession. I don't know. He's just like just such a great character, played impeccably by an incredibly handsome man. So like, what else can you say? Some really fun facts. So pivoting back to Iris in LA and her friendship with Arthur, at one point in his house, they show a shot of what is ostensibly supposed to be an Oscar, but Nancy shared a little tidbit in the commentary that you cannot actually show a real Oscar. This is like a law. You cannot show a real Oscar in a movie. It has to be a fake one. But Nancy had actually shot a real one in the interiors of Arthur's house. And so it was like, I think it was like home stretch where they were doing like the final cut of the film. And then someone was like, hey, wait, is that a real Oscar? Because you literally can't have that. It has to be fake. So they had to do like pickup shots of a fake one. But then they also shared that like that rule that doesn't apply to Emmys. Like you can have a real Emmy in a film, but not a real Oscar. Like how does that work? That's like such a weird thing. Oh, another scene. Another one of my favorite scenes is like a little bit shorter, but it's that Hanukkah party that Miles kind of crashes, and they put a circular dolly track around that table, which is why they kind of can, swivel the camera around in a 360 way. And I just think it's such like a vibrant scene, and it's just like, I don't know. I just think like the way that they shot that is like kind of genius, and lends it like a lot of, it's just like a really fun scene to watch, and it has like a lot of real warmth in it. It's just like this film in particular is just really good at harnessing like this kind of very warm feeling and a lot of like kind of genuine emotion, even though it's like there is a lot of artifice to it as well. But yeah, the emotions are what have to resonate. The emotions need to be real. And I think this film is very successful, emotionally speaking. Once more, I just wanted to note that I think that I love that for Iris, Nancy emphasizes her friendship with Arthur so much as an important part of her healing process. I feel like only after she's begun to heal by having these kind of genuine human connections with real affection in them that are platonic, does she begin to, even contemplate a romance. Like not only with, like she has this wonderful friendship with Arthur, but then she's friends with Miles first before she thinks of him romantically. And then for juxtaposition, I think it, like for Amanda's character, I wrote, she finds love when she finds someone who has the more traditionally feminine traits, right? We know like these ideas of like masculine traits or feminine traits or constructs, right? These are societal constructs. They're not things that are inherent. She finds a person who encourages her to feel, right? This is like, traditionally would be considered a feminine trait. But in this film, that's not emphasized at all, right? That's given to this male character, this wonderfully romantic, a very masculine in a lot of ways male character who women just adore in this film, and who's one of my favorite romantic leads in anything. But he is nevertheless the person, the feeling person in the relationship, right? And a person who encourages her to get more in touch with her emotional, soft side. And that's wonderful. I can't think of any other film that like does that in that way, and does it with kind of like such ease and like sweetness, and there's no like weird bluntness to it. It's never, they don't have to explain that too much. It's just something that's being played out in a very genuine way that I always find affecting in this film, honestly. Oh, to mention another famous film that's some would consider a romantic comedy. I don't know if I would classify it that way, but it is on that Vanity Fair list, and it's Billy Wilder's The Apartment. But Nancy said that she kind of based that scene between Iris and Miles when they're sharing their sad stories, as she would say, on a similar scene in The Apartment. And she kind of described it as two lonely people sharing their sad stories. So that scene where Miles kind of like sees his girlfriend with another man, and then they're just kind of like sharing, their sadness with each other, he and Iris later on, is kind of based on that scene in The Apartment. there are a couple different things, between it for the dynamic between Iris and Miles. It reminds me of my dynamic with my own husband, and I really like that about this film. There's that scene where Miles is playing the Arthur theme that he wrote for Iris, and then he says, "I also wrote one that sounds like you," and plays a little tune for her. And that reminds me of my husband because he writes songs all the time. He's always noodling on his guitar, and he's just very prolific. He likes to write a lot and record a lot. So this idea of him kind of like noodling and then like writing a song that, sounds like me or reminds him of me, just really, it reminded me of something that he would say to me, it would be like, this song, it reminded me of this thing about you, or I wrote it about this aspect of our relationship, that kind of thing. Another thing that reminds me a bit of my husband and their dynamic is Nancy describes Iris and Miles' relationship as a friendship that blossoms, which is the way a lot of great romantic relationships begin. And my marriage began that way. We were friends first and only became lovers later. And I was interested at first in my husband as a friend who was a good listener. At first, we worked together, and this was during the pandemic, so I wasn't even thinking of him as a friend, really. I was thinking of him as a coworker and an acquaintance. But the more we worked together, the more I realized that I loved that he was such a genuine presence and a really, really genuine listener, and was always listening to all the things that I was telling him and not just being polite to me. Sometimes you meet people, you're telling them a story, you can tell they're just being polite. They're not really listening. And, but you can tell the difference between that kind of person and then a person who is really listening, because later they bring up the things that you said, and so that way they were listening. That dynamic, I think, in this film really reminds me of the impetus for my own romantic partnership in my marriage. So I'm biased towards it in that way. Oh, I love the blockbuster scene in this so much. Speaking of physical media and just throwback, like, of things that like don't really exist anymore. This is like this was like, I think it was like, around Sunset Boulevard or something, this blockbuster. It was like a real one that they shot in. And she does a little story about like that little like cameo from Dustin Hoffman. There was like a restaurant right next to the blockbuster. He was eating there. He and Nancy like knew each other. Apparently their daughters were friends, so they like knew each other best from that aspect. And he like came and was just kind of like sitting with her at the monitor for a long time and hanging out with her. And then she was like, "Oh, will you be in this scene?" So like that's how that little cameo came to be. In any case, yeah. So there you have it. This is one of my favorite romantic comedies of all time. Definitely my top 5, probably my second favorite, honestly. That's how much I love it. And I just enjoy the hell out of it every time I watch it, and think it's just wonderful. It's a great movie to put on if you are having a bad day or something. It's going to cheer you up. One of my favorite scenes is Amanda in the car when she finally is able to shed some tears when she thinks she's leaving Grandma for good, and then the Hal Douglas voice comes back. And he's like, "Amanda Woods, welcome back." As a perpetual crier, I think that scene always gets to me, that it's, especially somebody who's been kind of derided when I was younger for crying too much. I love that scene that's kind of like, it's not only like okay to cry, it's good to cry. It's a kind of confirmation of your humanity and your ability to feel. So that's like a little thing about this movie that I really love. I feel like I get, confirmation from the universe every time I watch that scene that it's a good thing to cry. It's a life-affirming thing to cry. So I just wanted to share a little tidbit at the end here that the little kiss that Kate gives Jack while they're sitting in the audience for Arthur's award acceptance, award speech. She said that she and Kate they made a little secret plan that she was going to kiss him on the lips, and they didn't tell him. So that was like a kind of a genuine happy, like, surprised reaction from him for that. It's like it's like a tiny little kiss, but I think it's perfect for kind of like their romance that is clearly in its very early stages. And I also like for that very last scene of them all kind of like having a New Year's party together. Nancy mentions the song, in the background isn't like I'll Be With You Forever song, but it's just a love song. And it's like, Darling, You Send Me, I think are the lyrics for it. So it's just like kind of about that feeling of new love and the hope and anticipation that it brings for the future. And I really like that. And it being on New Year's, like a new beginning. Love that ending. There's been a few rumors that maybe there's going to be a sequel to this film. I don't know if I believe there is totally unconfirmed at this point, but it shows that there's a lot of people who would love to see a sequel to this film, and count me among them, definitely. And on that note, as above, so below, and peace out until next time. This podcast is produced by David Settle. He also made the music.